On May 18, 1291, the gates of Acre shattered under the weight of history itself. For 6 weeks, the most fortified city in the Holy Land had endured an apocalyptic siege. What followed in those final hours would mark not just the fall of a city, but the complete collapse of 2 centuries of Crusader presence in the Levant. By sunset, the streets would run with blood, and the dream of a Christian kingdom in the east would be extinguished forever. This is the story of Agar's last stand, a siege that historians regard as one of the most devastating military catastrophes of the medieval period. By the end of this account, you'll understand the strategic miscalculations that doomed the city, the brutal siege tactics that brought down its legendary walls, and the desperate final hours when knights, merchants, and citizens alike fought not for glory but simply for survival. To comprehend this tragedy, we must first understand what Acre represented. Located on the eastern Mediterranean coast, Acre was the jewel of what remained of the Crusader states. After Saladin's reconquest of Jerusalem in 1187, Acre had become the capital of the diminished Kingdom of Jerusalem. Its triple walls were considered virtually impregnable. Its harbor connected the Christian world to their eastern territories. Generations had invested fortunes in its defenses, certain that these walls would stand forever. By 1291, the political landscape had transformed dramatically. The Crusader states, once stretching from Armenia to Egypt, had contracted to a handful of coastal cities. Internal divisions plagued the Christian forces. The Knights Templar, the Knights Hospitaller, and various Italian merchant republics competed as much with each other as they cooperated against external threats. Military orders maintained separate quarters within Acre itself, each with its own command structure and agenda. Meanwhile, the Mamluk Sultanate had emerged as the dominant Muslim power in the region. Sultan al-Sharaf Khalil, who ascended to power in 1290, saw the conquest of Acre as both strategic necessity and personal legacy. His father, Sultan Kalawan, had planned the campaign before his death, that the son would complete what the father had envisioned: the total elimination of Crusader presence from the Holy Land. The numbers were stark and unforgiving. Historical sources suggest al-Ashraf Khalil assembled between 60,000 and 100,000 troops for the siege. Modern historians debate exact figures, but all agree the Mamluk force was massive, well supplied, and professionally commanded. Acre's defenders numbered perhaps 15,000 to 20,000, including knights, soldiers, and armed citizens. The city also sheltered tens of thousands of civilians, refugees who had fled from other fallen Crusader territories. The siege began on April 5, 1291. What made this assault different from previous attempts was the Mamluk mastery of siege technology. They brought approximately 100 siege engines, including massive counterweight trebuchets that could hurl stones weighing hundreds of pounds. These machines, with names recorded in Arabic chronicles, operated continuously, day and night. The bombardment was systematic and overwhelming. Stone projectiles crashed into walls, towers, and buildings. The psychological effect was calculated. No one in Acre could rest, eat, or move without fear of sudden death from above. The defenders employed every tactic known to medieval siege warfare. They launched desperate counterattacks, called sorties, attempting to destroy siege engines. Knights in full armor would charge from the gates at dawn, targeting the vulnerable wooden structures. Some raids succeeded temporarily, but Mamluk forces would simply rebuild and resume bombardment. The defenders also attempted to undermine Mamluk siege works through tunneling, but faced countermining operations from experienced Mamluk engineers. As April turned to May, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Food supplies dwindled. The constant bombardment prevented organized defense. Sections of the outer wall began to crumble. The garrison commander, Jean de Villiers, master of the Knights Hospitaller, was severely wounded in one of the sorties. Leadership fragmented further. The Templar master Guillaume de Beaujeu took effective command, but coordination between different factions remained problematic. The civilian population endured unimaginable conditions. Crowded into a city designed for far fewer inhabitants, disease spread rapidly. Water sources became contaminated. Parents faced impossible decisions about their children's survival. The wealthy attempted to secure passage on ships in the harbor, but vessels were few and space limited. Most refugees had nowhere to go, trapped between the failing walls and the sea. On May 15th, the Mamluks achieved the critical breakthrough. Their miners succeeded in collapsing a section of the outer wall near the accursed tower. Mamluk troops poured through the gap. What followed was 3 days of the most intense urban combat of the medieval period, a descent into chaos that would determine not just Agar's fate, but the future of Crusader presence in the east forever. The breach near the accursed tower transformed the siege from methodical warfare into desperate survival. Mamluk forces flooded through the gap in disciplined waves. The defenders fell back to the inner walls, abandoning the outer defenses they had held for 6 weeks. The streets between the first and second walls became a killing ground where medieval combat reached its most brutal intensity. Guillaume de Beaujeu, the Templar master, organized the defense with remarkable courage. Contemporary accounts describe him fighting in the breach itself, his distinctive white mantle with red cross visible amid the chaos. He understood that every hour of resistance bought time for civilians to evacuate by sea. The Templars and Hospitallers, despite their historical rivalries, fought together in these final hours. They erected barricades, fortified buildings, turned every street into a defensive position. The fighting on May 16th and 17th was house to house, room to room. Mamluk forces advanced methodically, using their numerical superiority to overwhelm each defensive position. Medieval urban combat was particularly brutal close-quarters combat with swords, axes, and maces, where armor provided some protection but exhaustion killed as surely as weapons. Wounded defenders had no medical facilities, no respite. They fought until they couldn't stand, then died where they fell. On the waterfront, scenes of desperation unfolded that chroniclers struggled to describe. Thousands of civilians crowded the harbor, pleading for space on any vessel. Ship captains, faced with impossible choices, took who they could. Historical records mention that some charged extortionate prices for passage, while others, particularly the Knights Hospitaller, organized evacuation of women and children without payment. Not everyone behaved heroically in these hours. Some ships departed half-empty rather than risk overloading. Others took gold and jewels from desperate refugees, then sailed away. The Templar fortress, the most heavily fortified position in Agar, became the last refuge. As the inner walls fell on May 17th, thousands of civilians fled to this stronghold. The Templars, though reduced to perhaps a few hundred capable fighters, accepted them all. Guillaume de Beaujeu led a sortie from the fortress that morning, attempting to relieve pressure on retreating defenders. He was struck by a crossbow bolt and mortally wounded. His last words, recorded by the chronicler Templar of Tyre, were instructions for continuing the defense. He died soon after, knowing the battle was lost but that honor had been preserved. By May 18th, Mamluk forces controlled virtually all of Agar except the Templar fortress. Sultan Al-Ashraf Khalil offered term surrender and received safe passage to Cyprus. The Templar commander, Peter de Severi, opened negotiations. But when Mamluk soldiers entered the fortress to arrange the evacuation, discipline broke down. Whether from the soldiers' misconduct toward women and children inside, or from miscommunication, fighting erupted again. The Templars killed the Mamluk soldiers, and the fortress gates slammed shut. Al-Ashraf Khalil's response was immediate and absolute. He ordered the fortress completely destroyed. Miners worked through the night, tunneling under the foundations. On May 28th, 10 days after the city's fall, the mines were fired. The ancient structure, which had withstood decades of sieges, collapsed. Everyone inside the remaining Templars, civilians who had sheltered there, and ironically, the Mamluk soldiers sent to occupy the ruins perished in the collapse. Historical sources estimate between 2,000 and 3,000 people died in that final catastrophe. The aftermath was systematic and thorough. Al-Ashraf Khalil ordered Agar completely demolished. Not just military fortifications, but everything: churches, markets, houses, harbors. The Sultan wanted to ensure no Crusader force could ever use Agar as a base again. The remaining coastal Crusader cities Tyre, Sidon, and Beirut surrendered or were quickly taken in the following months. By August 1291, not a single Crusader-controlled city remained on the Levanten coast. The human cost remains difficult to calculate precisely. Medieval chronicles provide conflicting numbers, written by survivors with their own biases and agendas. Historians estimate between 20,000 and 40,000 people perished during the siege and its immediate aftermath. From combat, disease, starvation, and the chaos of the final days, thousands more were enslaved. The Christian evacuation saved perhaps 10,000 to 15,000 refugees who reached Cyprus. Though many died from wounds and disease in the following weeks, the fall of Agar marked the definitive end of the Crusader states in the Holy Land. While military orders like the Templars and Hospitallers retreated to Cyprus and continued to exist, the dream of a permanent Christian kingdom in the Levant died in Agar's ruins. The geopolitical consequences rippled through Europe and the Middle East for decades. Agar's destruction demonstrated that even the most formidable fortifications, held by legendary warriors, could not overcome strategic isolation, divided command, and overwhelming force. The city itself remained abandoned for generations, its ruins standing as testament to ambition, courage, and the terrible price of religious conflict.